Okay, all right. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
We are back um, live. Um, we are continuing on through our journey through the Torah portion, the triennial Torah portion. We are we're in Deuteronomy chapter 10. We're going to look at chapter 10 and some of 11. Believe in. I wanted to deal with. We're going to deal with something that we see inside of chapter 10, um, and that is this idea of the circumcision of the heart. The circumcision of the heart. So we're going to look at that and see um, what that looks like. Pull up these slides. I think. Let's see if we. Think we can read through. Let's read through chapter 10. We'll read through chapter 10 and then we'll get into the slides. I think we'll do it like that. So let me pull up chapter 10. Hold on one second here. Let's see here. Let me just get this together. Deuteronomy 10. One. Let's read through that real quick. Let me put this on the screen. Deuteronomy chapter 10. Yeah.
At that time, Yahweh said to me, "Hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone, like the first, and come up to me on the mountain, and you shall make yourself an ark of wood. Then write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke, and you shall put them in the ark." So I made an ark of acacia wood, hewed to tablets of stone, like the first, and went up to the mountain, and with the 2 tablets in my hand. And he who wrote on the tablets according to the first writings, the 10 words which Yahweh has spoken to you in the mountains from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. Then Yahweh gave them to me. And I turned and came down from the mountain and put the tablets in the ark which I had made. And they are there as Yahweh commanded me. Now the children of Israel set out from the wells of Binah Yakum to Moshe. Aaron died there, and he was buried there. And Eleazar his son became priest in the place. From there they set out to Gulgadah, and from Gulgadah to Yadavtha, a land of rivers and water. At that time, Yahweh separated the tribe of Levi to break the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, to stand before Yahweh to serve him and to bless his name to this day. Therefore, Levi has no portion or inheritance with his brothers. Yahweh is his inheritance, as Yahweh your Elohim promised him. And I stayed in the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and Yahweh heard me at that time also, and Yahweh chose not to destroy you. And Yahweh said to me, "Arise, go before the people to set out, and let them go and possess the land which I swore to their fathers to give them." And now, Israel, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you? But to fear Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, to guard the commands of Yahweh and his laws which I command you today for your good. See the heavens and the heavens of heavens belong to Yahweh your Elohim, also the earth with all that is in it. Yahweh delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, you above all people, as it is today. And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your neck no more. For Yahweh your Elohim is Elohim of mighty ones and masters of masters, the great El, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He execute right ruling for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger, and giving him food and garment. And you shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Mizraim. Fear Yahweh your Elohim, serve him, and cling to him, and swear by his name. He is your praise. He is your Elohim, who has done for you these great and awesome deeds which your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Mizraim with 70 beings, and now Yahweh your Elohim has made you as numerous as the stars of the heavens.
All right.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Okay, very good. So let me just get out of this. Huh? Or you just pull this. Okay, so we are going to again deal with chapter 10, look at some things in 11 also, but mainly we want to look at chapter 10 and this idea of the circumcision of the heart. Sorry, weekly midrash. Okay, so Pesal Lecha. Pesal Lecha. Carve for yourself. That's what that says there. And that's in the first significant words of chapter 10. I believe the King James might say hew. Hew for yourself 2 tablets. Okay, so verse 1 says, at that time, Yahweh said to me, hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone, like the first, and come up to me on the mountain, and you shall make yourself an ark of wood. Okay, so when we look back at, again, Deuteronomy, the whole chapter basically is a retelling of what was. Moshe is basically bringing the people up, back up to speed in terms of, they're about to go into the land. So he's kind of giving like this overview of, where they came from, all that happened in the wilderness and, pushing them forward to, go over into the promised land. So at this point, chapter 10, he's dealing with when what happened when Moshe went to receive this new set of commandments. Because of course he had broke the original ones after seeing what had went on with the golden calf situation. So we want to look at a few things here and see if we can find some kind of underlying things that are going on in terms of what we see being described here. So first of all, um, he says, what Yahweh said to him to hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone to or carve for yourself. That word hew or carve is pesal, which means to literally to carve. Whether you're talking about wood or you're talking about stone. Um, let's see, to cut with an axe or other like instruments for the purpose of making an even surface or side. He was making tablets, right? He's making 2 tablets, right? So the idea of making kind of a flat side makes sense because you're making you're literally making tablets. You're making a surface. You're carving a surface that would be appropriate to have writings put on it, right? He's preparing this place, this surface for these commandments to be written on them, right? So we want to pay close attention to, what's going on here with, you know, these tablets of stone. Um, again, because he's hewing, right? He's carving, he's cutting with a chisel to make smooth. Is the idea that we find when we look at this here word, right? So when you think about one thing I was just thinking about when you look at this when you look at I just did it again. I'm trying to go back here to this. Okay. Does it seem like okay? This is just something I thought about. Um, what is he talking about in terms of verse? Oh, let me go back in verse 1. Here and come up to me. Oh, and you shall make for yourself an ark of wood. He's making this thing, this ark of wood, uh, for the commandments to go in. When he's done. What's he describing right there?
What is he describing?
Okay, because again, he's making y'all the Most High wants for these tablets, that were broken previously to be put in a place, it's kind of special. These things are kind of special. Yahweh, we don't hear about the Most High writing anything except for these 10 words, right? Moshe, out of his utter disgust with the people, broke the first copy. Right? So, which is, it's kind of crazy. It ain't like he could just go and get another. Well, he ended up just going to get another one, but
go to Walmart.
He couldn't. He shouldn't have just assumed that he would have been able to just go back and get another one. In fact, the Most High is the one who's initiating this. What's going to go on. It wasn't like he asked for another one. Right. So he wants for this thing to be protected. Right? So what's it going to be protected in though? Well, the answer is right there, but it when you think about it too hard, I think it could potentially cause some confusion.
It can.
Okay, so it's an ark of wood, right? But I'm trying to figure out what is that though, right? What is that ark of wood? Is that like just a kind of a separate thing that they had, with the commandments in, or is that something that we know of already? All right, so I guess one has the answer.
What's the word for ark? I'll have to look it up.
Let's set up. Word for ark.
That word is Aaron.
Okay.
Aaron.
It's not a different word. It's not really a trick question. You should have the answer already.
Right.
But just the way that is worded here in the process, it causes a little bit of confusion. I think okay. The commandments are kept inside of the Ark of the Covenant. Right. The Ark of Testimony is called the Ark of the Testimony because it got the testimony in it. Right. But this is kind of an incomplete description of exactly what this is here. It's not like a full description of, because the Ark of the Covenant we know is overlaid with gold. But in its essence, it is in a wooden box. It's a wooden box overlaid with gold. Right. So we know where the commandments end up at. They end up in the Ark of the Covenant, in the Ark of the Testimony. Right. It's called the Ark of the Testimony because the testimony's in the Ark. But when we look at this here, it's not giving you all the details. It's not including Baal Zael or the craftsman that was the foreman over the creating of all of the parts and the pieces. It's just saying Yahweh telling Moses to go and make a box and put these commandments in it. But we know that the commandments are inside of the Ark of the Covenant. But I just wanted to bring that up just because, just to clear things up, because here, the description is not giving you a full description. It's not as if there's a wooden box that has the commandments in it. That's that's all that's there. That wooden box that's being spoken of here in Deuteronomy 10, verse 1 is indeed the ark that had the mercy seat sitting on top of it. But it's just not giving you all of those details here with that. I just wanted to just bring that out. Unless somebody thinks that it ain't that. Okay, so let's move down to verse. I want to look at verse 11 is where we really want to deal with. I just wanted to bring that up. (11 through 13). We read this, but I want to deal with this a little bit. And Yahweh said unto me, he's talking about Moshe, is the me here. Arise, go before the people to set out and let them go in and possess the land, which I swore to their fathers to give them. And now, Israel, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you? But to fear Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all of his ways, and to love him, and to serve Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, and to guard the commandments of Yahweh and his laws, which I command you today for your good. So we want to deal with this. Yet the Most High, in preparation to sending his people, Israel, over into the land, asks a question. What is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you? What is he asking of you? What is he requiring of you? An inquiry, a question, right? A request, a demand, right? By extension, to demand, ask, to beg, to lay charge, consult. This is what, but okay, so we're thinking about all of these things, right? Desire. What is Yahweh's desire of you? What is this thing that he is requiring of you, or what charge is he putting on you as you go forth into the land? Right, this is kind of a serious question right here. Like, this is kind of like the prerequisite of, what needs to happen with the people. The thing that needs to be at the forefront of their minds as they're going to move over into the land. What is the Almighty requiring of you? What is it? So he tells us, right? There's a list here in verse 12 and 13.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is fear. To fear Yahweh your Elohim. That's the first thing he's requiring of you. The next thing is to walk in all his ways. Right? This is the thing that he's desiring, that he's making a demand on you. Right? To love him. To love Yahweh. To serve Yahweh, your Elohim. To serve him. And to guard his commandments and his statutes. So we want to look at these 5 things here, and try to understand what it is these things are, because again, when we look at the wilderness experience, and we talked about this at Sukkot, when we look at the wilderness experience, it is something that exemplifies our life as we move through the wilderness going towards the promised land, right? So here the Most High is given, he's putting this thing on the table for the people as they get ready to go into the land. And he says, these are the 5 things that I'm requiring of you. Right? So it would be behoove it of us to know what those 5 things are. Right? So we want to look at that and see if we have a kind of clear understanding as to what these things are. So let's look at these one by one, right? He said the first thing that he is requiring of you is to fear Yahweh. To fear Yahweh. To fear, morally to revere, causatively to frighten, affright, to be or to make afraid, dreadful, to put in fear. When we think about the fear of Yahweh,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I think, I've heard people at times try to make fear, this word Yahra or Yahre, means something. I feel like people sometimes try to diminish this word and make it be kind of like a PC thing.
So true.
Right? And say, well, fear, it means it's reverence. Right? It doesn't mean like, it's not like being afraid. It just means to revere, right? Which, that's part of it. Right? But you also have this aspect of being, or actually making or being made afraid. Right? It's there. So we can't try to lessen this word here. But, because I've certainly seen people try to do it.
Mm-hmm.
When they look at this thing, well, you're not supposed to be afraid of the Almighty.
But then he says he's a consuming fire, so
Consuming fire.
you're gonna just go up and start touching some fire and be
No.
like, I don't really care.
Right. There's fear involved. I know about this, right? As an electrician. You must have a fear of this thing, because if you do not treat it, and this is a good analogy, I would say, if you don't treat this invisible thing, this thing that you cannot see, if you do not fear this thing, it can kill you.
Yeah, that's the truth.
You can't see it, but it's there. I'm talking about electricity.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot see this thing, but it's definitely there.
You touch it, you'll feel it.
If you touch it, you'll know.
You'll get shocked.
Yeah.
You'll know, right? So you must fear this thing. You must take all of the necessary precautions to work with electricity in a safe manner. Because as soon as you don't do that, as soon as we when we went through the apprenticeship, we watched this little movie, and it was called I Felt Comfortable. Right? So as soon as you feel comfortable, and then the video was about a guy who got severely burned, almost killed. Because of not fearing that thing, right? Which was electricity.
How somebody could look at you and be like, you putting on fire retardant clothes and wearing a mask, and doing all this stuff. We don't see anything.
Right. Rubber
Why
gloves.
You doing all this? We don't even see anything that you over there. You're over there and we don't even see anything. You got all this precaution and all this. They probably look at us with Yahweh that way. Y'all sitting there doing all this.
You ain't never seen his face.
Yeah, never seen his face.
Right?
You doing all this stuff and we don't even see him. They probably looking at you with the electricity like that. Like,
same thing.
What you putting all this stuff on for?
Yeah.
And we don't even see anything.
Right.
You over there just moving things around that we can see, but we don't see any electricity.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So you got to have that fear. That fear must be there. We can call it respect, right? We can call it that. We can call it reverence. But listen, you better be afraid of the consequences of what will happen if you do not treat the Most High with the utmost respect. Right? So when we look at things like where it talks about in Proverbs chapter 1, which is, these things are important, right? When we look at, let's see here. Proverbs chapter 1. Says the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Right? This is where it all begins. It's with that fear. With that dread. Right? Knowing that if you do not pay attention to what it is that the Most High is doing and asking you and requiring of you, something bad could happen, right?
Right.
Can I say something to that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just had a conversation with somebody who used to be a Christian 2 days ago. And, they were telling me how basically it's a fantasy. and they just come to the realization that, you know, it's just not real. It's like stories. And I'm like, well, what made you even come to this, you know, this thought? And he was like, just, you know, researching it and figuring out that man wrote these books. You know, he was like, I always thought, you know, it was the actual hand of God that wrote the Bible.
Mhm.
and and then he went on and said a lot of different things. And basically, it's the thought of man. The man, you know, they don't see God, you know, like striking men and plagues and all of these things that are happening. They don't see it as the hand of God, and they are looking for, you know, the skies to crack open. Like, that's when I'll believe that there is a God. Yeah, it's just unbelief. They don't believe that there is a God. You
Mhm.
know, and science and all of these things are always disproving, you know, or trying to disprove that there is a God. And so, you know, you have a lot of people who believe in science and believe in these different things, and they don't fear God.
Right. So, right. So when you think about, like, you give a perfect example, what's going on here is these thought processes come in and introduce doubt into the situation, right? Doubt, which is, you know, chopping away at faith, right? Which is causing that fear then to diminish, right? Because when we think about the fear, when we think about this dread, it's based on something, right? Again, when you think about Proverbs 1 and 7, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge.
Mm.
That fear is based on understanding who Yahweh is. That fear is based on understanding what it is that who the Most High is and what he's capable of. Right? When we understand the essence of who the Almighty is, right? That's where the fear comes from. Knowing that he's the creator and sustainer of all things. I'm here because he put me here, right? I am because he made me. Understanding that, right? The fear comes from that. Understanding who he is, right? So when we have these things, these thought processes that come along and chip away at these truths, you know, entering in doubt to the situation, Bible says that without faith, it's impossible to please Elohim. Right? And people who have never experienced the real foundation of the Almighty in their lives, right? You know, the easier it is for doubt and things to creep in.
And also for them to turn away once they come in. Like they can accept some truth, but it's easier for them to fall away. You know?
Right. So when I look at that, it causes me within myself to question then the fear that they ever had. Right? If I have a true fear for a thing, that fear is going to always be there if I understand what that thing is. It can't diminish, it can't disappear, it can't go away because I know what that thing is. When I see these little canines coming around with these little big old teeth barking and looking at me and you know, on the other side of the fence, right, ready to jump on me, I understand that them things can do harm to me, right? Because I understand what it is. And it's the same thing with the Almighty. When we understand who he is, when we have an understanding of who he is, it gives us that fear. So when we think about what it is that the Almighty is requiring or desiring of us, when we see fear being that thing is the first thing on that list. The thing that's intrinsically connected to that is the knowledge of Yahweh, having an understanding of who he is. When we look at let's look at where's this at after Proverbs? Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verse 13 says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. You know, Solomon went through this whole thing of all of this stuff, you know, the life that he's lived, the heights and the valleys, and being the most wisest person that there could be. And he says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. What's the conclusion? Fear Elohim and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. But the first thing he says is what? To fear Elohim. To fear. It's kind of the prerequisite to keeping the commandments. What's the point of doing what he says if it don't even matter whether I do it or not? Right? I have to have an understanding of who he is first in order to want to do something that's to care about doing anything that's pleasing in his sight. So there got to be that fear, right? It got to be that genuine fear. And we can call it respect, but let's not try to take away that trembling from it, right? Because that's definitely a part. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so he said, first of all, right, to fear Yahweh, your Elohim. And then next, he said, to walk in all his ways. To walk in all his ways. Right? So this is the next thing, right? If we're going to, first of all, fear him, we're first of all going to look and understand who he is and what he's capable of and how he relates to us, how we relate to him. Understanding who the Most High is in regards to everything else, right? First, and then next, right? Walking in all his ways. So let's look at this walking, right? Because again, if we have this list of these things that the Most High is requiring of us, if we don't know what these things essentially are, then how we supposed to do these things, right? So this word here that's translated as walk is halak. To walk. In a great variety of applications, behave, right? Our behavior is incorporated in this word halak. To come continually, to be conversant, depart, exercise self, right? We think about this idea of walking and it's just like putting one foot in front of the other, right? But it's giving us really the idea of our conduct. A lemon. Our conduct is involved in this, right? Our behavior, how we live, right? So our conduct, the way that we live, should exemplify all his ways, right? The way that we behave should exemplify all his ways. this word halak is interesting because I like to compare it to, and not just me, but look, when you see here, the Strong's says that this word halak is akin to this word here, 33212, which is yalak, which also means to walk or to carry, to bring, right? It has the same meaning, basically, right? So one halak is akin to this yalak, right? So when you look at these words again, having the same basic definitions, when you look at them when you look at them in the ancient, we can find some interesting things. So this here is what halak would look like in the ancient Hebrew, right? The hay, of course, being the man with his arms raised, right? The lamed being this shepherd's staff, right? And the kaf being this palm, this open palm, right? So this is what halak. This is what halak looks like. So when we look at yalach, looks like this, right? You have the yod, which is the arm and the hand, right? And you know, that's the only difference between the words, one being the hay and the one being the yod, right? So when we look, let me go back. Okay, so when we think about the I keep going back. When we go back to, let's go back to the halach and deal with that some. When we look at the hay and understand that it is the breath, right? The hay is the breath. When you look at something kind of with slight amazement, it can cause you to breathe in. When you see a thing, it's funny because little Ari sometimes does this, right? When something kind of new and it can be surprising, kind of there's a little bit of excitement about it. You kind of have this kind of you take a breath, right? So this is the idea of the hay, right? Is this breath, right? So, but when we think about the breath and what it is, really it's something that it's happening on the inside of us. It's when we can think about it as being kind of an internal thing that's going on, right? It's a force that lives inside of us, our breath, right? And when you die, that thing goes out and it don't come back, right? But when you're alive, you have this thing that kind of happens, and it's from within. So when we think about the idea that is put forth with this version of the word, is dealing with us. Okay, so halak is this. When you look at the lamed here, is the leading, right? Is the leading with the shepherd's staff. The shepherd's staff gives you the idea of leading, and the palm here gives you the idea of bending, right? So the leading that causes reaction, which is bending or submitting to a thing, but the instigation of it is an internal thing. So an internal drive that leads and causes to bend or to submit to is the idea that we have with the version of this word that is, that has the hey. But when we think about this from the one that is connected to, that starts with the yod, right? The yod, the arm and the hand. When we look at the yod, right, it begins from up high.
Begins from in the air.
It begins from up in the air, right, and then comes down, and then has the hand at the bottom. Right, the hand is where you do the work and you exercise your strength, but it comes from the base of the arm, which is way up here. Right, so the thing that leads and guides and results in the submission or the bending or the allowing originates from on high as opposed to from inside. Right, so when we think about the idea of walking in the ways of the Almighty, it's one thing to have that be something that begins with you, that's instigated from you, that comes from inside of you. But it's a whole other thing when we talk about that as being something that's instigated from above. Right? And that's the place that we have to actually get to. It's from the place that we're not when we think about the idea of our strength being in Yahweh, right? The joy of Yahweh is our strength. Understanding who Yahweh is, right? And that being a joy and a strength to us, understanding that our strength comes from on high, right? That's the idea of this walking that we have to get into, right? Because the people at this time knew what they were supposed to be doing. They had the commandments. They saw what the Most High did. They witnessed his mighty works, but having that knowledge, which is something that happens inside of you, having that knowledge didn't keep them on the path. It didn't cause them to walk in all of his ways. Right? We see that when we think about what it is that the Most High actually wants for us. And again, when we look at this is literally happening, and he's literally giving these people these things that he's requiring of them as they're going to walk over into the actual land. But we have to be able to look at the underlying principles that are here and think about this from a spiritual perspective, and that the end result of all of this is for us to actually be going to actually dwell with him forever, right? And this walk in this wilderness that we live in is to get us to the place that he would have for us to be, right? And so we see that he's kind of hinting at the idea of he's giving us the principles, right? But the end result is something that's from a spiritual perspective, right? So when we think about how it is that we are to walk in all of his ways, it's not going to be from the perspective of us doing it from our own strength, right? Because we're not able, our righteousness, the righteousness that derives from us, the righteousness that derives from inside of us, that is initiated by us, is as filthy rags. But the righteousness that is from above, right? That is the way that we will be able to truly walk in all of his ways. Where's that at? Is that in Romans chapter 10, I think? Let me see. He says 7:18. What's 7:18? He said.
In our flesh, both good thing.
Oh yeah, that's good. That's good from one perspective, right? 7:18. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwells no good thing. For to will is present within me. You're talking about the stuff that's inside of me, who I am, right? For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good, I find not. Right? So that's dealing with that breath, with that thing that starts inside of me. I can will myself to do a thing. Right? But that's not the goal, right? That all of that at the end of the day is something that's coming from my flesh. That's my righteousness. That thing that's coming from inside of me, who I am, my flesh, my carnality, my will. Right? But I was thinking about, so that's the one end, but the other end is Romans chapter 10. Where it says verse 3, but I'll just read 1, 2, and 3. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Elohim for Israel is that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of Elohim, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of Elohim's righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of Elohim. That's talking about Yeshua, right? Verse 4, for Messiah is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believes, right? The understanding that the righteousness of Elohim is not about what you in of yourself can will yourself to do. But the righteousness of Elohim is about having the very presence of Yahweh and Yeshua inside of you, leading and guiding you and transforming you into the likeness of Messiah. The righteousness of Elohim is Yeshua in you, right? Righteousness from on high. Right, that's how we walk in all of his ways, not by our own strength, but by the strength that Yah provides through his son, Yeshua. Right, so again, these are the things that Yahweh is calling for Israel to have established inside of them as they walk over into the land. Fear of Yahweh and walking in his ways.
I wanted to say also that
just talk up though.
Can you hear me? Let's speak up. That it's about experience too, because when you're walking, like someone like Sister Gabriel been walking for 40 years in this way. I gotta move it up from 20 because I'm almost at 20 now. But because someone who comes in and they've just been walking for a few years, you know, it's not the same as you don't have the same level of experience as someone who's been walking this way for 40 years. That's why we have the elders in Israel. That's why we have, you know, the priests, they was 30 when they started. They wasn't 15 or 10 like Hizki, you know. And then they had the elders that was 50 and older that would oversee what they was doing. And so when I'm thinking about walking in Yah, walking in this faith, we also got to look at the experience that they, you know, that the people have that are doing the walking.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you think about it from that perspective, again, is dealing with something that's outside of yourself. It's dealing with something that's outside of yourself. It's foolish. It's foolish for, and this is, I've talked about this before. This is what young people do. It's foolish for people to think that they have all of the answers in light, you know, when they're put with other people who've lived a whole life before them, right? Israel was not ever about individuals in their own individual bubbles, right? Israel was always about community, right? And the old teaching the younger, right? So when we think about this idea again of walking, right? We live in a place, you know, where when we look at Israel, Israel is about community. It's about people dealing with each other, right? And helping one another, which again goes with this idea of Yalak, because it's not simply about you doing something based on your own situation. It's about that arm reaching down and grabbing and helping and holding on to you as you walk. So that, you know, that we can look at that as being you know, the community, or we can look at that also as being the Almighty, because that's where we are. We're in a place, you know, when we hear from the Father, we also hear from other people who hear from the Father, right? But again, it's something that's more than just something that comes solely from within an individual. So again, so that's good. When you think about the idea of walking and your lifestyle, I guess the overall point of it is dealing with help outside of yourself. Okay, so what else? What else he got on here, right? He said to walk in all his ways and love him. Walk in all his ways and love him. That word is ahav. 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 Oh, don't let him. He's gonna spill it. To have affection for, love. Right. Let's look at this over here. When we think about this word affection, right? This word affection, the state of being affected. That's a little used word. But I want to look at this here. Maybe not even this so much passion, but more generally, this third definition here: a bend of mind towards a particular object, holding a middle place between disposition, which is natural, and passion, which is excited by the presence of its exciting object. Affection is a permanent bend of the mind formed by the presence of an object or by some act of another person and existing without the presence of its object. So we think about this idea of affection, this bend of mind, this thought process that you have, and this decision that you make in your mind. You've decided, it's bent in your mind that you're going to deal with a particular object in a particular way. And sometimes it's a natural thing, like with children. And sometimes it's a unnatural thing, with, like, I'm saying unnatural because it's not automatic. With spouses, that's something that's, I'm saying unnatural because it's not something that's just automatic. It's something that's turned on. This bend of mind, right? I love my children. They came from me, right? So it's kind of a natural connection that I have with my children, right? But then there's also the way that the children got here, right? Which it would be with my spouse, which I bent my mind in such a way that I decided to be attached to and connected to this lady and deal with her in a certain way forever. But here we're talking about y'all. Oh, was you gonna say something? Okay, so here we're talking about this is what we are doing towards the Almighty, right? There is a bend in our mind towards the Almighty that becomes unchanging, right? You decide to deal with the Almighty in a certain way, and then that's just how you're going to deal with it. But that's love, though, right? Regardless of the situations and circumstances. Again, we can only think about it from kind of this earthly perspective, right? Regardless of how much I get on my wife's nerves, she's still gonna love me. That's right, because that's a bend of mind towards me that she had, and vice versa. You notice how I use me as the one getting on the nerves, right? But the reverse is also true. I've decided, right, where the love that I have for her is going to be unchanging, and it's not depending on outside situations, circumstances, and situations, right? That's love, right? And affection, right? So let's look at this here. This is interesting. Jeff Benner has this take on this love, right? When we look at Ahav, which would be the olive, the hay, and the bait. Here we're just looking at the bait. I mean the hay and the bait. The 2-letter root of the 3-letter word, which is Ahav, right? So we have here, look, he says the picture of the hay, which is the man with his arm raised, represents one who is looking at a great sight with his hands raised and is saying, behold. Right? That's what we were talking about earlier. You have this intake of breath when you see this thing that's like amazing. Right? And then the bait, which is the tent plan, right? It represents the tent or the house. So combining these pictures means a look towards the house or provide for the family. One does not choose the household which he is born into, including tribes, parents, children, and from a Hebraic perspective, even a wife, because marriages were some things that was arranged. Right? So you when you think about family and tribe and things, it includes these people which you don't really have a choice in the matter. You're dealing with these people no matter what. You can't choose your family, right? Your family is your family, and you deal with them accordingly in love, right? So when we look at our family, we're able to get a good picture of what love should look like. And then as Jeff Bennett goes on to say, these gifts are seen as a privilege and are to be cherished and protected. Right? So when we think about love, then, right, we think about it in, a lot of times we think about it in this kind of emotional way, and emotions can be part of the situation, but it's more about it's more about kind of a state of being, I guess, almost. Is more about, again, this irrevocable bend of mind, like we talked about with the other definition, in terms of you are going to now deal with these people in a specific way. But now again, here in this verse is talking about the Almighty. And this can also be connected back to this whole idea of fear, because your actions are going to be your actions that you walk in are going to look a certain way, right? In love towards the Almighty, right? It's kind of the result of understanding who the Most High is, right? Walking in His ways looks a certain way, right? You're doing this thing almost, it's almost obligatory, almost. I kind of don't want to use that word, but it kind of is. Like when you think about it, and first of all, think about it in your earthly relationships, you're obligated to deal with your immediate family members away, right? It's obligatory, right? That is your place in life, is to deal with your family a certain way. And likewise, when we think about the idea of loving the Almighty, is there's no difference. It's obligatory. You as being Israel, you as being the people of the Almighty, this is the thing that he desires. This is the thing that he's desiring of you, is that you love him. Right. So the more I think about it, the less I want to not say obligatory, right? Because he is literally desiring this, requiring this of you, to love him, to deal with him in a way that is pleasing to him. Yeah, that's right. I almost just went PC on you just real quick. You see how I just almost did that? How I almost didn't want to say you obligated? Yeah. Did you see that? Yeah. Yeah, I noticed. You obligated. All right, let's keep on going here. Okay, so we looked at fear, we looked at walking in his ways, we looked at loving him, and it says to serve him. Yes. To serve Yahweh with all your heart and soul. To serve him. To serve, to till, causatively enslave, etc. Keep in bondage. Wow, that sounds away, doesn't it? To be bondman, bond service, compel. You know, if I'm compelling you to do a thing, or I'm doing things based on compulsion. That's right. labor, laboring, bring to pass, cause, serve, so on and so forth. So when we think about the idea of serving Yahweh as being enslaved, right? This is giving weight to this thing that I was trying not to get on before. And this was this obligation. We think about this idea of enslavement and bondage, being bound to Yahweh, being bound to him, right? With all your heart and all of your soul, being bound to Yahweh, being bound. Like when we went to the that little museum, the Underground Railroad Museum, we saw where they put on the runaway slaves a ball and a chain. They put it on their ankle so they wouldn't run away. And there was a few. The museum had a few of them there. Them balls, pretty serious. They pretty heavy. It's hard to run around if you got one of them things on. But the idea is this being bound. They also had the thing where they had human yokes, where men were yoked together. They were bound to one another. But here we're talking about the idea of being bound to Yahweh, right? Being affixed to the Almighty, connected, right? Being compelled to do that which is pleasing to the Almighty with all of your heart and soul, right? This idea of servitude is on the list. It's one of those things that the Most High is requiring of you, requiring of his people, so that the people can go into the land. Abad. To work, to serve. This labor may be focused on things, other people, or Elohim. It's used in reference to things in regards to tilling the ground, right? Working the garden, craftsmen, so on and so forth. Let's see here. When focus of the labor is another person, we see how Jacob served Laban, right? He was in service to Laban. The Israelites served in Mitzrayim, right? But when we think about it in regards to the Almighty, when we think about the things, when we look at worship unto the Almighty, is actually something when we think about is service unto Yahweh. So when we think about let's see, when we think about where it says in Romans chapter 12, I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of Elohim, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto Elohim, which is your reasonable service. Verse 2, and be not conformed to this world, as if that is in some way connected to this idea of being a sacrifice. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of Elohim. So when we think about the idea of not being conformed to the world and actually being transformed by the renewing of our minds, that's actually what being a living sacrifice actually looks like, right? You giving your service unto the Almighty with all of your heart and with all of your soul looks like the things that are pleasing to the Almighty, right? And it doesn't look like the world, right? This was a main thing that Yahweh wanted to get across to the people, which they never was able to get, because it always became a thing with Israel that they was always allowing these foreign ideas and thoughts to enter into their service unto the Almighty. Israel was never able to not be conformed to the world, right? They was always being conformed to the world and not being renewed, transformed by the renewing of their minds. So when we think about this idea of service, kind of these things kind of build on each other. These things kind of build when we think about the fear and the walking, the conduct, you know, how we live our lives, our love that we have for the Almighty, our connection to Him, right, and our servitude towards Him, right. That's only where it is based on these other things that we have because we love Him. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. If you'll love me, you'll do that which is pleasing in my sight. If you fear me, then your conduct will be visible through your conduct, and you'll love me, right? These things all kind of coincide with each other. And then lastly on the list, right, we have what? To keep Yahweh's commandments and statutes,
Right.
To shamar, to guard them, right? To put a hedge around them as thorns, that is to guard, protect, attend to, be circumspect, take heed. So when we think about the idea of keeping His commandments, it's not necessarily about doing the commandments. Like that's not the thought that's being put forth with keeping the commandments, because He could have said asah, which would be what the word do, right? But here He's talking about keep, which is giving you the idea of guarding or hedging or protecting, right? So it's different, not to say that He doesn't want you to do the commandments, but that's not the thought that He's putting forth here. The idea is shamaring the commandments, which is about protecting and keeping, right? So this is kind of the step before the doing. Like I'm going to make sure that it's going to be possible for me to be able to do the doing by keeping, right? I know that I have to keep the Shabbat. So I'm going to make sure that I do the things that's necessary with my employers and such, that when the Shabbat come around, you're not looking for me because I'm not going to be there, right? Because I made the necessary precautions and preparations beforehand. I put those hedges up so that I'm able to do the commandments and the statutes, right? That's putting those hedges up. We were waiting for dinner on yesterday, and I'm basically talking to myself because Ari probably don't really understand what I'm talking about. But I'm talking to her about the fact that mommy is making food for 2 days, right? Yesterday. She's putting a hedge around the commandments, right? She's making the food for Friday night and also Shabbat all in one day, right? She's putting a hedge around the commandments, protecting them, right? So when we think about this idea of keeping the commandments, yes, of course, the end result is to do them, right? But the things have to be in place and in order so that you're able to do them. And it probably begins with a frame of mind. It probably begins with a frame of mind and understanding that I need to make sure that I'm doing those things which the Most High is pleased with. I guess it just keeps coming back to that, right? Again, these things are building on themselves. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let's go down. Let's go down to we have here 14 through 16. Anybody have any thoughts or questions or comments about those little 5 things? The fear and the walk and the love and the serving and the keeping.
Yeah, we must have a healthy fear of Yah if we're going to walk in his ways in love and obedience to him.
Mm-hmm.
You must fear. The scripture says, again, the love is fear of Yah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we must fear him. Many today may say they fear him, but they don't show it in their actions. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So that is very true. So are they actually serving him? You know? Are they have a healthy fear of him? I developed a healthy fear of him, especially coming from my past. How can we appreciate the love of Yah without first knowing what it's like to live without him? I stand corrected many times when he gave me mercy. And I also saw where he can also punish me. Just like you fear the whoopings of mom and dad. He treated us just like that. Also been shown too, if Hiskey was out there playing in the playground and he's not playing right, wanting to be like the rest of the children, but you keep giving him warning after warning. Do not be like them. Stop cutting up. Warning after warning. Eventually you're going to tell him to bring his behind in the house. He cannot go out there anymore with the rest of the children. That's what Yahweh does to us. He brings our behind back in the house so we won't socialize with the world. So we must develop a healthy fear of Yah in order to walk in his ways.
Yeah. Yes, that's important because, you know, people could say what they want to say, but as you say, the actions, the proof is in the proverbial pudding.
Yes, it is.
Right? When you could say whatever you want to say, but what does your walk look like? That's the thing, and that's how you able to tell. You could look and know where the fear of Yahweh is in a person based on what they're doing. You know, their walk. Right?
That's right.
So we started off talking about the circumcision of the heart. So now we there, right? If we look at Deuteronomy 14 through 16, when we read this again, I'll just read here, where it says, see, the heavens and the heaven of heavens belong to Yahweh, your Elohim. Also, the earth with all that is in it. Yahweh delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them you above all peoples as it is today. And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your neck no more. Circumcise, to cut short, that is curtail, specifically the prepuce, or the foreskin, basically, that is to circumcise, by implication, to blunt or to cut or to destroy, cut down, so on and so forth. So when we think about the circumcision of your heart, when we think about the circumcision in the flesh, you know, you're taking this kind of I don't know if it's extra, I don't know if it's extra or excess or whatever skin, and removing it. But I think the idea is not so much of what that skin is or what purpose it serves, but more so the fact that there is this act of cutting, this removal of a thing, right? And that's the idea that we have with this, you know, with this word here, circumcised, is this to cut. So when we think about this idea of circumcision, in general, we're not circumcising ourselves. Not to say that there weren't those who circumcised themselves in the scriptures.
Right.
But in general, the act of circumcision is something that's done to you. It's not something that you do to yourself in general. So we want to look at this from how is done in general, and not the exception to the rule, because the exception is, you know, when you have these grown people who end up doing it to themselves, right? But the idea of it is for it to be done to you. Okay, so when we look here at this verse, the verse said what? The verse said, yeah, let me pull that back up here. The verse said, circumcise, you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your neck no more. So how in the world are you supposed to circumcise your heart? Is that, do we look at that? Do we look at the heart circumcision as something? I mean, it's called circumcision, right? So we have to look at the physical first to be able to understand what this spiritual, this metaphysical thing is, right? Because when he says circumcision of the heart, he's not talking about taking a knife and cutting your chest open and doing anything to it, right? He's talking about this metaphysical thing from a physical perspective. So I'm trying to figure out, can you really circumcise your own heart? How you do that? How you circumcise your heart?
I think Malachi 3:3, where Yahweh said he's going to purify the Levites. So I think it's a yielding.
Hold on, what do it say?
He puts us through fire. So like he said in Hebrews 5:8, Yahshua learned obedience by the things he suffered. Oh. So sometimes Yahweh puts us through trials and tribulations.
Hold on, what was the Malachi?
As we yield. 3:3. I think it's Malachi 3:3. He says he's going to purify us.
He shall sit as a refiner.
Yeah, that's it.
Verse 2.
Oh, it's 2. Okay.
Well, it is 3, but I was going to read 2. But
Okay.
who may abide the day of his coming, and who shall stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. Verse 3, and he shall sit. He shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he shall purify the sons of Levi and purge them as gold and silver, that he may offer unto Yahweh an offering in righteousness. So that is something talking about something being done to someone.
Yeah, but I was thinking about yielding, us yielding to it.
Yeah. Yes.
Submitting.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so let's go all the way back. We look back at the idea of hewing for yourself. Right? It's a different word, but it's still cutting. But let's think about what happened, right? Moshe hewed the stone. He prepared a place for the words to be written, but he didn't write the words. He did prepare a place for the words to be written, but he didn't write the words. You see? I think the same thing is true when we think about the idea of circumcision of the heart. You prepare a place for the Almighty to reside. But when we think about what it is that goes on with the circumcision of the heart, what that is, that spiritual heart transplant, you're not performing a heart transplant on yourself. That's not what it says in Ezekiel. When we think about what that is, a circumcision of the heart, he says in chapter 36, verse 26, a new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you, and I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. This is something that the Most High is doing to you. Going along with the idea of circumcision, how is something that is done to the child. You take the child and you circumcise the child. It's something that it's an act that's done to the child. When I look at what this verse here, Deuteronomy 10 and 16, and then also even putting this together with what we were just looking at, when you think about this kind of in its totality, the whole point again, when you look at, Paul talks about the Torah as being a schoolmaster that leads us unto Messiah. When we look at the law, statutes, and commandments, and the fact that Yahweh gave us this way to live, but when we look at the people who walked it out, they was never able as a whole to do these things. They always fell short. But they always needed Messiah. The people always needed Messiah, right? And that's what we see. When we look at the true application of the circumcision of the foreskin of your heart, when we look at the true application of that, we're talking about this conversion experience that happens when we receive the spirit of Yahweh in our hearts. That's the only way our necks can be hardened no more. And not only that we have a circumcised heart, but that we walk according to our circumcised heart. Right? So even a circumcised heart is not even the end all be all. Because once that ruach is inside of you, you still got to heed unto it. Right? So just like when we look back at how it talks about putting these tablets in this wooden box, it didn't give you all of the instructions. It didn't give you all of the details. The same thing could be true here. When we look down at this verse 16, it's not giving you all of the details. Because you circumcising your own heart, really, I would say, goes against the idea of walking in the strength of the Almighty. That's you walking in your own strength. That's me in my own righteousness doing whatever it is I feel I'm able to do inside of my own strength. But the thing that we see that pushes Israel over the hump is what we find inside of the new covenant and what Messiah fulfills when he, with his life, death, and resurrection, and him going back to the Father and sending his Ruach HaKodesh back into the earth, into the hearts of men.
Now, is it that like just how he put the commandments on stone,
Mm-hmm.
and we couldn't do it on the stone, so then he makes it where he writes it on our hearts for us.
Right.
And then by his spirit inside of us causes us to keep his commandments, his laws, and his statutes.
Right. The true circumcision. But
so that's the true circumcision.
How we was looking back with what Moshe did is that he did prepare a place to receive the commandments.
So that's what we when it talks
so we
about,
do that by faith in Yeshua.
Yeah.
We're taking these stones
and you're making
we're making a spot for them commandments to go. So we're not circumcising ourselves, but we are creating a place for the commandments to be at.
Yeah.
Which is that faith in Messiah.
Yeah.
And what he's done.
Well, I'm saying that so when Moses says, circumcise therefore the foreskins of your heart, when he talks to the people, then I think it's later on in Deuteronomy where he says that you're not going to do this.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
So he's saying for us to do something that he already knows, just like if you tell a man to go circumcise himself, a grown man.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be too many grown men that's going to take a knife and circumcise their own flesh, their
Mm-hmm.
own self. They're going to probably get somebody else to come and do it before they're going to do it themselves. But the thing about it is that Moses already knew that we wasn't going to do it. Just like how Yah already knew he was going to write these commandments down, and we wasn't going to do it. Therefore, the lamb was slain before the foundation of the earth.
Yeah.
And then it talks, and then Peter says, was it Peter? Is it Peter? He says that he appeared at this time for the sake of you, for the sake of the people, that the sake of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was already done.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same way, even the whole thought process of the circumcision of our hearts, Moses says to do it, but he already knows that we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But are you saying that when Moses is saying to circumcise the foreskin of your heart, that he's saying to prepare a place for Yah to abide and to write his commandments on your heart?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that when he's saying circumcise the foreskin of your heart, at the most you could do is be pulling that skin up but you're not cutting the skin.
That's the work of the Most
You
High.
preparing a place, just like Moses went and prepared the stone. You preparing your a place, but I'm saying in general, he's speaking to everybody. He's not speaking to the exception. He's speaking to everybody. So when you think about the idea again of circumcision, it's not something that you do to yourself. So if preparing a place is just you going over to the person who's going to do it, it's preparing a place, but you're not actually doing it. You just getting everything in order so that it could be done. So it's not as if, because in other words, what we're going to say, Moses is telling them this thing that they not able to do. He's not giving them a command of something that they're not able to do. He's giving them a command, of something that they're doing what they are physically able to do. And again, when we look at these things, again, we on the other side of Messiah are able to see and look back that he's giving you these spiritual principles. Because again, when we look at what we see and know as the new covenant is where the foreskin of our heart is cut off. That's where it's done. All of the time up into that point, we're just at a place where we still need for that to happen, because from this point where he says this on, all we see is a stiff-necked Israel, because we needed Yeshua to come, right? And this is just showing us that we needed Yeshua to come.
Yeah, we need Yeshua to come. Yeah.
Right. So we think about the circumcision of the heart, right? We have to look at it in the context of what it is that Messiah has done for us. We have to look at it in light of what we can understand this to mean. I don't know what this means if it doesn't mean what Messiah came to do. I don't know how outside of Messiah I do this. I don't know how I do it outside of Messiah. I don't know how the foreskin of my heart can be cut off outside of Messiah. The only way I know how to look at this is from a prophetic perspective. The only way I can look at this is in terms of Moshe speaking into the future about a time that at that time had not come to be. Okay, does anybody have any thoughts or questions or comments on any of that stuff?
I like what you said about getting your life in order so you can receive Yeshua to make the changes, to transform, to change the right. His laws on our heart and our mind. We have to get ourselves in order. Once we find out about the Levitical dietary law, we start lining ourselves up with that.
Well, I think that to me, I feel like the getting yourself in order stops at accepting Messiah for who he is. Because we can't do the things that's necessary within our own selves. Right? It must be Messiah in us doing it. Right? So when we go back and you know how he started with fear. When we go back and having an understanding of who Yahweh is, understanding of who Yeshua is and what he came to do, accepting him, truly accepting him into our lives as they say, our Lord and Savior, is him literally being our master.
Right.
And him literally being the one that leads us and guides us. And truly doing that is how you take that stone and you make it flat so the Most High can write his laws on your heart. Because anything outside of that is your own righteousness. Like I can't sit up here and do things to qualify myself to be righteous. It has to be from the Almighty. It has to be from on high. So my preparation, my getting myself in order is submitting my will to Yeshua. And then, like you say, then now I'm able to look now after the fact and look at people's lives and see if that fear is real, if that profession that you made is real by seeing the person's life after the fact. Okay, so one more thing before we stop. I don't think I have any more slides. I don't think. One more verse I wanted to look at. Let me just flip to it real quick. Because I say this all the time, right? I say this thing all the time. But I want to bring a verse that kind of gives you, gives it some biblical backing. Whoa. Right? Because I have this principle that I bring forth, but I want to show the principle in the scriptures, right? So let's look over here. Hold on, let me pull this up. We're going to look down at verse 17 and 18. I'm just going to pull it up. Pull it up here. Okay, 17 and 18 says, "For Yahweh our Elohim is Elohim of mighty ones and master of masters, the great El, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He executes right ruling for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger, giving him food and a garment." Okay, so how we talking about Yahweh first of all, 17 and 18, right? For Yahweh, that we could be without a shadow of a doubt that 17 and 18 is talking about the Almighty. So how does the Almighty show no partiality nor take a bribe and give food and garments and love to the fatherless and the widow and the stranger?
You think that's showing partiality? You know?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying how. I'm saying how does the Almighty do it? I'm saying how does He do it? If I wanted to bribe the Almighty, how would I do it?
How would you do it?
If I wanted to do it. If he took a bribe, how would I do it? He, it says, he, talking about Yahweh, executes right ruling for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, giving him food and a garment. And then now he goes on and says, and you shall love the stranger, for you was a stranger in the land of Mizraim. So he talks about the stuff that he does, Yahweh, in terms of not showing partiality, nor taking a bribe, and executing right ruling to the fatherless and the widow, and loving the stranger and giving them food and a garment. This is what Yahweh does. And then now you, it says, talking about us, love the stranger, because you was a stranger in Mizraim. So I'm trying to figure out how is he doing this stuff? How's Yahweh the Most High giving food and garments to the stranger and loving the stranger and executing right ruling for the fatherless?
Is he doing that through us?
What?
Through us? He's doing that through us as Israel.
Isn't love one of his main virtues? It's part of his character.
It is.
I mean, that's what he does. Love.
Right. So both of y'all are saying the right things. Love is part of his character. Yeah. Love is part of his character. He executes right ruling for the fatherless and through the widow, and loves the stranger through his people that are keeping his commands.
Right, right.
So I started off by saying that I always say this thing that is this principle that's in the scripture, but it's not a Bible verse.
Right.
And that is that the Torah is the law of Yahweh humanized. It's the character of Yahweh humanized. The law of Yahweh is the character of Yahweh humanized. So right here, we see a perfect example of where Yahweh is saying the stuff that he does, but the only way that he does it is through the keeping of his commandments. His people actually doing his law, statutes, and commandments. And so when we think about the idea of loving a stranger, we're not only loving a stranger because we were strangers, but we're loving the stranger because Yahweh loves the stranger. But how does he love the stranger? Less is through his people that's exemplifying his character through the commandments.
There's no room for hate. If you love a stranger, how much more so you're supposed to love a brother?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Everybody's fed. He feeds it says giving him food.
And
the way
clothes.
the way they have food was because they ate from the corners of the field.
Mm-hmm.
You were supposed to leave the harvest, some of your harvest, for them to eat.
But Yahweh saying he's doing that. So I'm saying he's doing that through you doing what he said do. So I'm saying that just to say, when we think about the laws and statutes and commandments, they are the character of Yahweh humanized. Yahweh is able to express his character through his commandments, through you doing his commandments. And so when we think about all of this, we have to put all these things in context and understanding when these people come with these ideas of what the new covenant is. When we think about what the new covenant is, when we think about what the circumcision of your heart is you actually walking in the character of the Almighty. He can't have circumcised your heart and you are not walking in his character. Well, maybe he did circumcise your heart, but you're not walking in that circumcision though. Right? Because again, you need to actually walk in the spirit, right? Those who are led by the Spirit are called the sons of Elohim. Right. So when we think about this idea of having this circumcised heart, right, it looks like something. Right. It's not just some internal thing. Right. It looks like something. And here
I think about what Yeshua said. He said, he who believes in me, as the scripture said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water.
Yeah.
It's talking about something that's coming out from you.
Right. And it's not like there's going to be some big like faucet with some like water gushing out of you. Like it looks like this right here. It looks like you executing right ruling to the fatherless and to the widow and loving the stranger and giving them food and a garment. That's what it looks like. Okay, so I wanted just to bring that up because, again, when we think about this idea of the circumcision of the heart, right? When we think about this idea of the Spirit being inside of us, right? When we think about this idea of what it is that the new covenant is doing in us, right? It's causing us to walk out the character of Yahweh. Right. And then we see an example of that in Deuteronomy 17. He shows you what Deuteronomy 10, 17 and 18. He's showing you what his character looks like. Right? He's showing you what a circumcised heart looks like. He just went through all the things. This is what I do. This is my character, right? So now, verse 19, so you love your stranger. I am a manifestation of love. Therefore, you love too. Right? You person who has this circumcised heart and does not have this stiff neck. Right? And then look, verse 20, he gets back to this again. Fear Yahweh. Says that again. Serve him. Says that again. And cling to him. Swear by his name, right? He is your praise. He is your tehillah. He is your halal. Right? He is that light at the end of the tunnel that you look towards and that you run to. Right? He is your praise. He is your Elohim. He who has done for you these great and awesome deeds which your eyes have seen. Okay, so this is where we are, right? This is where we are. Well, we can look at this from an old covenant perspective and see that they're given the formula. The formula is there for these people in this time. The formula is right there. But they missing a key variable in the equation. Which we have, which is Yeshua. Right. So we have to understand that this is not the Most High. He didn't put forth this thing that, again, these words are eternal. Right. He spoke them at a specific period and point in time, but they're eternal. And we had to have seen everything play out so that we could get to the place that we are even now. Right, so
even that one verse in John where when Yeshua said, out of his belly will flow rivers of living water. The next verse says, but this he spoke of the Spirit, which those believing in him would receive. And it said, but the Spirit was not yet given because Yeshua was not yet glorified. Right. So that ties into what you're saying here.
So he's talking to a people about coming to him and drinking this water that is living water. And when you drink it, you never thirst again. But none of them people was able to just drink it right then whenever he was saying it. So the same thing is true when we look at these words here in the Torah, where we see Moshe here speaking to the people, telling them to circumcise their hearts. We have the formula, right? But the key variable was still yet to come at that time. But now in Yeshua, we got the variable, right? We've solved for X in the situation, right? Okay, so does anybody have any thoughts or questions or comments before we are done with this here? Go ahead.
Oh, tagging on what Sister Teresa was saying about loving the stranger, loving your brothers and sisters. I think it's Galatians that Yahshua said, be good to all men, overcome evil but good, be good to all men, but especially those of the lost sheep of Israel, the household of faith. So as Yahshua's spirit in us causes us to be kind to everyone as he's directing us, not just there's a homeless person that's letting him in our house. We don't know what kind of demons and spirits are in them, not just, with wisdom. With wisdom.
He didn't say bring them in your house. He said give them some food and give them some clothes. You don't gotta bring them in your house. Didn't say bring them.
Yeah, how people.
But people will take it to that. Yeah.
Yeah. People interpret that as helping. Helping somebody. But more importantly, Yahweh was saying, be especially merciful, kind, understanding, using the fruits of the Spirit towards your brethren. When there's a difference of opinion, yield, let the other brother win. Okay, brother, okay, sister, let them win, just go pray about it. But always walking in love.
No, don't cut them off.
Yeah, don't cut them off. No, don't throw
them
away.
Well, we didn't agree with that, so I can't talk to you anymore.
Yeah, no, don't cut them off. Still love them, pray for them, send them a Hallmark card.
Hallmark.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah.
If that works. Send them some money in the mail. That'll really work.
Yeah.
I'll do that. But that will work. Love.
Yes.
Having that. How can we love our Yahweh if we can't love our brothers and sisters?
Right.
So if you're gonna love a stranger, you better love some people that you see in your face. And then sometimes it's easier to love somebody you don't see, though. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's easier to love somebody you don't know because you don't know them, right?
That's true.
It's harder to love somebody you see.
Yeah, you have to be bent, right, Tony? Bent toward that affection.
Yeah.
That was nice. Bent toward the affection.
Okay. Being said, we will be done for now, and we will, y'all willing, be back next week.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.